Assalamu alaikum viewers, you are watching Insaan Kal. As you all know, through this platform, we are trying to connect the modern mind with the tradition. And when it comes to tradition and Muslim tradition, especially the personality of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad's family and Prophet Muhammad's companions, they form the core of Muslim faith. They are our role models. They are personalities to be imitated, to be emulated, and to be internalized. Viewers, in order to remember Ahlul Bayt, we have a unique personality today joining us all the way from London. He is Father Christopher Cluhesi. Father Cluhesi is an ordained priest associated with Vatican, but at the same time, he is the scholar of Arabic, scholar of Muslim history, and he specializes in the history of Ahlul Bayt, in the history of family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a very interesting combination. He has also written books on Lady Fatima, on Lady Zainab, and on Al Hussein alayhi salam. It is a matter of honor for us that he is joining us all the way from London. And today we'll be discussing Ahlul Bayt, family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially Al Hussein, Lady Zainab. Father Cluhesi, thanks a lot for your time and welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Thanks a lot. Father, a very basic question up front. You are associated with Vatican, you are an ordained priest, and then you specialize in the personalities of Ahlul Bayt. You have written books for Ahlul Bayt. So could you run us through your journey, your academic journey as a Christian Catholic, still writing books on Al Hussein, on Lady Zainab, on Lady Fatima? So if you could share with our viewers your journey, sir.
Thank you. Well, from the 1960s onwards, the Catholic Church has attempted to maintain a dialogue with Islam, but a dialogue that is not just emotional or spiritual or pragmatic, but also a dialogue that's academic. And for that reason, the Church opened a college which began in Tunisia, but then finally moved to Rome, where people could come and study Islam. So the teachers of Muslims and Christians, and the attempt of the college to promote dialogue is that non-Muslims can see Islam through its own texts, not through Western interpretation of those texts, but through the actual texts themselves. Students specialize in classical Arabic and then in Quran and in the sciences of Islam. I myself went to that college to begin my studies in 1997 and decided to specialize when I came to write my doctorate in Islam. And I decided to do that because up until very recently, the study of Islam, particularly the traditions of the faith, the life of Al Hussein and the martyrdom of Al Hussein, and all of the that spring from this, those events have been sadly neglected by Western scholarship, which has concentrated on other branches or other areas of Islamic studies. So I was one of the first to specialize in Islam, especially in the faith. Now there are plenty of scholars doing that. And I produced what I think was and may still be the first academic work on the Lady Fatima. That is a biography of Lady Fatima based on his sources and Arabic sources, rather than just a hagiography, a sentimental work describing her holiness. Those works are very, but we need to go deeper. So I began with Lady Fatima, and then I decided that I would spend the rest of my career specializing in history. That is the Karbala event and the people who populate that event, not just Al Hussein, but some of the others. At present, for example, I'm working on finishing a text on Al Abbas, who I think cannot be separated from Al Hussein. So that was the journey. We promote healthy dialogue, but dialogue based on academic knowledge. That you need to know faith and the tradition of the person you're attempting to dialogue with, so that you can avoid basic and begin to move to the heart of the issue. And the Catholic Church has promoted and maintained a very healthy dialogue with Islam. A number of popes, John Paul and Benedict and now Francis, have visited Islamic majority countries and been received there. So there's a very good dialogue going on, but that dialogue has to be based on a great deal of hard work and study. And that's where I fit in. And it hasn't been hard work for me. I've enjoyed and continue to enjoy my work and my writing. But nonetheless, these studies for us are a very important part of the dialogue process.
Thanks a lot. That's very helpful. Yes, I think academic dialogue is the way forward. And as men of faith, we need to talk about things which are in common and universal symbols, so to speak. Father Al-Hussein, I think we cannot really view him through a sectarian lens. He is a universal figure at the end of the day. And he's not just for Muslims, I believe he's for humanity at large also. The kind of precedent that he has set, I think he speaks volumes to other nations also. How would you respond to this? Al-Hussein as a universal symbol of sacrifice, of standing against oppression, so on and so forth. Father.
I agree with you 100%. I think that it would be a tragedy if a figure like Al-Hussein, not only him, others too, but let's stick with Al-Hussein. If a figure like Al-Hussein remained an icon and a model of sacrifice and of martyrdom and of standing for justice, you remained all of those things for one particular faith family and was thus cut off from the rest of humanity. I think myself, I think that God raises up these icons in every generation, and he raises them up to be universal models, so that Al-Hussein becomes for me a universal model of being prepared to stand for justice at great cost, as did Lady Zainab, like him. Being prepared to stand for justice and for what we know to be right at great cost. For most human beings, every single day of our lives, we have ethical decisions. They may be very small decisions compared to what happens on the world stage. But for each of us, in our own private journey, we are daily called upon to make decisions between compromise or being faithful to the truth, between the commandment or keeping the commandment. And for many people, those struggles are very difficult. People don't want to lose friends. They don't want to be unpopular. They don't want people to think that they're religious fanatics because they obey the law of God. And I think Al-Hussein, for all of those people, no matter what their religion, even if they don't believe anything, no matter what their language or their culture or their race, Al-Hussein for me is one of those iconic figures who gives courage and strength by his example. And so I agree 100%. I think that if we trap these iconic figures into one faith tradition, we separate them from being known by all the world. And it's one of the reasons that I've been writing. I don't write books for Muslims. I don't think Muslims need me to tell them about their important figures. I write for a non-Muslim world, maybe even for a non-believing world, to hold up some of these figures. Look right through history in the Middle East, not just in the West. These extraordinary, heroic men and women have been taking stands for justice, and they're important as models for us in the West, as important as the Western models that we can name. In this way, we try to transcend some of these foolish boundaries and futile boundaries that we create between groups and religions, and even between East and West.
There are unfortunately quite a few foolish and futile boundaries nonetheless, and as you are rightly pointing out, we need to transcend these futile boundaries, so to speak. Father, there might be a theological difference when it comes to the personality of Jesus Christ, but at the end of the day, Jesus is universally admired in the Muslim tradition also, despite that theological difference. And there is also a parallel between the lives of the Christ and Al-Hussein. If you were to draw on this parallel, between the struggle of Jesus Christ and Hussein ibn Ali. If you would want to shed some light, Father.
Well, I think you make a very good point. Firstly, that there are differences. Jesus is not Al-Hussein and Al-Hussein is not Jesus. And we have to make clear separations. Each of them was used differently, if you like, in the divine plan. Let's put it that way. And each of them makes different claims, and each of them has different claims made by their adherents. Nonetheless, I think that there is an extreme similarity, not just between Al-Hussein, but also between their mothers, the Lady Fatima and the Lady Mary. So if you put those four characters together without blurring the distinctions, they are both of them, or all four of them, have very, very close connections. So you have two men, both of whom were unjustly killed because they status quo, unjustly killed, had their lives taken from them by others in a manner that was unjust because they stood for what they believed. Therefore, both of them, of course, are martyrs of the highest degree. Both of them suffered greatly on their journey towards martyrdom. Both of them were abandoned by many people, and only a few remained faithful to them in those last days and hours. And both of them have mothers who are sorrowful women and intercessory women to whom God has given great power, especially on the last day, to make intercession for their communities. And so you have this model of a mother and a son, which I think, despite the theological distinctions, which I always try to keep clear, once again suggests to me some sort of icon for the world, that the idea of the mother and her son, the martyr, just restricted to one tradition, but is open to other traditions as well.
Father, on a very different note, in one of your discussions, you were talking about the appearance of a miraculous pen post Karbala, when the head of Al Hussein was being transferred from the plains of Karbala, and it was being taken towards Yazid in Damascus. During that journey, there were stops and miraculous appearance of the pen, and the pen was sort of writing something on the wall, and it's been recorded by most Muslim historians also. And there was another parallel that you talk about with another king, a Babylonian king, and the appearance of a finger. So if you could sort of run us through this narration, the Hebrew scripture, and then,
It's a wonderful, wonderful story. The Jewish scriptures in the book of Daniel, there is a famous story about not the king Nebuchadnezzar, but his regent is a blasphemous and drunken man. And he has a wild party in the palace, and he orders that the sacred vessels that had been looted from the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, that these vessels be brought, and so that they can be used blasphemously in this drunken party. And in the course of this famous party, a finger appears, and it begins to write a phrase on a wall, and it's a phrase that cannot be read by the regent or by his guests because it's written in a different language, and like Arabic, it's written without vowels. And finally, they discover that they in the kingdom a young man called Daniel, who is a prophet, and he's able to interpret these things, and he is brought and he interprets the writing, and it's a condemnation not only of that regent, he wasn't king, acting in place of the king, but also of the whole nation. You have been weighed in the scales, the text says, and you've been wanting. So years later, after I'd written about Al-Hussein, I discovered this text, which is recorded, as you say, by both Sunni and Shia scholars. And it is during the journey in which the heads of Al-Hussein and his companions are being carried from Karbala to Kufa, or maybe from Kufa to Damascus. It's difficult always to know exactly when it happened, but they stopped for a night in a monastery. And they place the head of Al-Hussein, once again blasphemously treating this sacred object, they place it on a stake, and then or a stick, and food brought to them, and they begin to eat and drink. And again, you have the appearance of not a finger, but an iron pen which begins to write on the wall of the monastery. But it writes in a language they don't fully understand, and it has to be interpreted for them. And the phrase that the pen writes is, "Does a nation which killed Hussein still hope for his intercession on the day of judgment?" It's negative. Don't hope for his intercession. You won't get it on the day of judgment. So it's a crushing indictment of the regime of Yazid, and all of those who Ibn Yazid, and all of those who serve Yazid and Ibn Ziyad, and all of those who served them, all of those who were associated with the death of Al-Hussein and his companions, that on the day of judgment, they are not going to find intercession from Al-Hussein, but more especially, it is particularly about the prophetic intercession. And I made it's not the intercession of Al-Hussein, it's, does a nation that killed Al-Hussein think that they will get the Prophet's intercession, that is his grandfather's intercession. So it is a crushing indictment. And I thought that they were, and in fact, I wrote a paper for a journal about these two texts, one written in Aramaic and one in Arabic, and the similarities, a language that couldn't be understood, a blasphemous king, a drunken king or leader using sacred objects to offend God, and then the terrible indictment against these people and their nations. It was a very interesting text.
That's a very interesting parallel. And as you were talking about, one could also draw a parallel between this regent and Yazid himself, who again was, a man of luxury and a drunkard man, so to speak. Taking this conversation a little forward, we talk about Lady Zainab and the critical role that she played during the Battle of Karbala, and especially post-Karbala, the way she led the army of Al-Hussein before Ali bin al-Hussein Zainul Abidin sort of took over, because he was a sick child nonetheless. My question to you, and it really baffles me in a way, a lady whose brother is killed, whose sons are killed, and she is a woman and in a specific gender role, and then she is able to speak forcefully in the court of Kufa, in the court of Damascus. Where will you place this woman in the annals of history, vis-a-vis her courage, vis-a-vis her bravery, and oratory at the same time? Father?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to remind ourselves that at times in the retelling of the Karbala event, we are inclined to realize it in the sense that we forget the brutality of that day. It was an horrific day.
Absolutely.
Of people seeing their loved ones slaughtered one by one. And it's very easy to fall away from that and to talk about Karbala the way we talk about in history. But no, Karbala is a day of absolute horror. And in the middle of this, you have this extraordinary who accompanies her brother, despite the fact that her husband tried to persuade her not to. She accompanies her brother, possibly sons, although there's some disputes in the text about that. But let's just say for the moment with two of her sons. And she is present in the tent, women and the children, right through the battle. And there is psychological change in Lady Zainab, which greatly interests me because again, sometimes we hold and they are unreachable. People could never, ever model themselves. But what interests me about the Lady Zainab was, as you trace and track her journey leaving Medina with the group, and then this long journey which ends up in Karbala, there is a very definite psychological change. In fact, I called it an existential journey. It's the journey in which Lady Zainab is being prepared to play the role for which she was created. So in the early stages of the journey, a number of things frighten her terribly and reduce her to, she has to be comforted and consoled. And we know this because Zain al-Abidin was an eyewitness to these things, and because she was looking after him. But on the battle, she's transformed psychologically. She comes out at least 3 times onto the field of battle in the heart of the conflict for a variety of reasons. And a number of the scholars who write about her say that she was like the sun rising when she came out of her tent. So the woman of the days previous, who'd been so frightened, now, on the day of Karbala, now she comes into her own and she becomes the matriarch of that whole family, as well as a familiar, comforting presence for her brother. So she intervenes a number of times on the field, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully, but nonetheless she does intervene. And immediately after the death of whoever are the last to die, maybe Al-Abbas and then Al-Hussein, she takes control and she gathers the survivors, women and children, including Zain al-Abidin, whose story by itself is very interesting, and she shepherds them. It's the only word I can think of. She shepherds them that appalling journey. So they've had this most horrendous day on what would have been Friday, I think, the 10th of Ashura. On the day, they have this appalling day where the bodies are lying around them, the tents have threatened, the soldiers have threatened even to kill Zain al-Abidin, and then the bodies are buried. And then on the third day, the Sunday, which would have been the 12th of Ashura, they begin this dreadful veil, stripped of their veils, on camels from Karbala to Kufa and from Kufa to Damascus. In Kufa, in the streets of Kufa, Lady Zainab makes her first protest. Some people call it a sermon. It wasn't a sermon. She did not preach a sermon. It was a protest, a political protest regime, and a reminder to the people of Kufa who had absolutely failed Al-Hussein, a reminder to them not only of what they'd done in their failure, but to them of who Al-Hussein was and what he had done. So that's the first address in the streets. And then she Yazid and in his court. And Yazid psychologically is an appalling human being. I think, I'm sorry, Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad is the first leader who she meets in his court in Kufa after her first protest. Ibn Ziyad is an appalling human being. He's worse than Yazid. His behavior is worse than Yazid. Yazid does a number of curious things, like children from seeing the head of Al-Hussein. Ibn Ziyad makes sure they see it. He's a brute. And he threatens to kill Lady Zainab because she challenges him, then throws herself over Zain al-Abidin because he wants to kill Zainab al-Abidin as well. So she stands up against this absolute monster. And you know, monsters who are psychologically evil, they are very, very dangerous because they turn and they change at any moment. And we see in the conversations that Ibn Ziyad changes from fury to praise he's psychologically a damaged man. And then she arrives, the second part of the journey, to the court of Ziyad, and there she makes it again in the court of Ibn Ziyad. It is Zainab who speaks first, and then Ibn Ziyad notices Zain al-Abidin. In the court of Yazid, it is Zain al-Abidin who speaks first, and then he turns his attention to Zainab, and she makes this extraordinary protest against him, how she got away with her life, the things she said about him to him. There's some, I think, this is my own opinion, I think Yazid already was deeply regretting what had happened. I think he realized that he just made a terrible mistake. And he starts blaming everybody else, including Ibn Ziyad. And he starts treating the survivors very nicely. Zain al-Abidin, he tells him, anything you want, ask me, I'll give you anything you want. So I think you have a man who's furiously backpedaling to get himself in a very bad situation. But her challenge to him in his court is almost unique in history when it comes to a woman, and a woman of a certain age. I mean, Zainab would have been close to 60. She wasn't a teenager. A woman of a certain age and wisdom standing before a man who is known for his wickedness and just shredding him. And that's what she did. She tore great strips of him and left him absolutely speechless. He didn't know what to say to her. So I'm deeply sorry that she's not better known, that any books ever written about her. So I produced a book primarily because I wanted people to know about this. I mean, in days of modern feminism, you want to say to people, listen, there have been plenty of examples in history, a woman of great power. So you don't have to think that all of the sort of feminist movement is something new. It's not something new. Women have been doing extraordinary things for centuries. We just don't know about them, and we need to discover them. and learn from them.
That's a very interesting observation that in an age of feminism, we have to remind ourselves that there were women, there were ladies who stood up for themselves and stood up against the oppressor also. And Lady Zainab is one of those very important personalities. Taking the conversation forward, Father, I would want to ask that despite you being an academic and you're consistently saying that, you know, this is your academic journey, but then there is a lot of love, a lot of devotion that I see as you describe these personalities, as you talk about Al Hussein, as you talk about Lady Zainab, as you talk about Lady Fatima. So, what is the secret behind this love and devotion that you harbor? And on a different note, you are still Christian, and you know. So, in my part of the world, people may find this a very unique combination. A Christian priest talking about Al Hussein, talking about the family of Prophet Muhammad with such beautiful devotion. Would you like to respond to this, sir?
Well, very simply, because when I look at the lives of Lady Fatima, Lady Zainab, Al Hussein, Al Abbas, I see the work of God in them. Or I see at least God at work in human beings. And it is a very dangerous thing for us to try to restrict the work of God to our own religious, to think that the only saints are the saints that belong to our church or our faith family. No, God is universal, and God works how he wants, wherever he wants, in whoever he wants. And in every generation, in every religion, he's raised up what Christians call saints. You can use that word, friends of God, awliya, whatever word you want to use, raised up people. And it would be, for me, a terrible blindness if we were not able enough to recognize the God who I love working in people of other traditions, other languages, other cultures. That would be a real blindness. So when I wrote the book on Lady Zainab, the book was called Half of My Heart. And people kept saying, so if Lady Zainab is half of your heart, who's the other half? And I think probably Al Abbas. I know it should be Al Hussein, but it really is Al Abbas. I've just come to the end of a long 3-year journey of studying his life almost daily. And he too is an extraordinary man. But again, it's primarily because I see virtues in them that are human, because virtues are human things. They're not, courage, bravery, honesty, justice. These are virtues that belong to people, whether they are believers or not. But they works through those virtues. He uses the courage or the fearlessness or the justice or the honor, whatever else other virtue in people, and raises them to great heights to make them into models for humanity. And so I have great love for the Ahl Bayt, and I know that there's some members who I've neglected. I really should study a great deal more about Ali himself. There's some books now. I think Ali has lacked in the Western world good literature. Now, 1 or 2 very good books have come out in the last 3 years on Ali himself, and I hope that they will introduce this, again, extraordinary man to a wider group. But there are others who are neglected. You mentioned Al-Hassan at the beginning. Al-Hassan badly neglected. Zain al-Abidin, I think, also needs a great deal more scholarly attention, especially for the prayers that he produced, his book of prayers and invocations. So that's the simple answer, although I've taken a long time to say it. I really do recognize in them the same God who I hope works in us, all of us. And for me, that's a matter of rejoice, not a matter to feel confusion or jealousy that God should dare to work in someone who doesn't belong to my church, to my faith.
Beautifully put. I think these are the kinds of narratives that we need to mainstream as men of faith, representing different faiths. That at the end of the day, God's hand is, working in a unique manner, and these personalities representing different traditions are actually part of the same journey and part of the same source, so to speak. So yeah, you mentioned about Al-Hassan. I also, in the beginning, I wanted to talk about Al-Hassan also because his death anniversary is also approaching. When we see these traditions, there is an equal emphasis on the personality of Al-Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam. When Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sort of praise Al-Hussein, Al-Hasan is also there. So a lot of these traditions, Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein, they are synonymous. They are like integral part of the narrative. But somehow,
Yes.
very little academic attention and very little historic attention has been given to Al-Hasan. So what would be the reason behind this? Why all the spotlight is always? Of course, we know that the tragedy of Karbala, the magnitude is huge, and in that sense, there is no comparison. But still, Al-Hasan also deserved a place in our consciousness, in our collective consciousness, but was denied, so to speak. What could be the reason for this?
It is a curious thing. Firstly, as you correctly say, the Prophet himself held boys. He called them together, the leaders of the young people of paradise, for example. So it was never that he ever separated the two. In Western academic scholarship, he's been greatly neglected in favor of Al-Hussein. But I think even in Middle Eastern scholarship, the Karbala event overshadows so many other things, including the martyrdom of Al-Hasan, because he too is a martyr. He is one of the imams, has to be a martyr. And his martyrdom is greatly overshadowed by the political and social circumstances surrounding the martyrdom of Al-Hussein. And he has suffered, I think, even on both sides, all because he's somewhat overshadowed as in the Middle Eastern scholarship. And I think that's a great pity. In the same way, I mean, it's not only Al-Hasan. In the same way, for example, that the children, who are the children of Ali and Fatima, how many of them stand out? Certainly, there were others as well, and they are somewhat overshadowed by the members of the Ahlul Bayt who are on a world stage. Al-Hussein was on stage tackling Yazid and his cohorts. Lady Zainab was part of that journey and that battle. Whereas someone like Zain al-Abidin, he wasn't on the world stage. He went into quietude and prayer and spirituality. He was still imam, but he wasn't an imam in the same way that he's been imam on a more kind of public stage. So I think part of that is the problem too, that some more prominent historical roles than others. But I would hope that somewhere along the line, Al-Hasan, and I think the same about Al-Abbas, because Al-Abbas, every 8th of Muharram or 9th of Muharram, I think 9th of Muharram, Al-Abbas is celebrated all over the world, and his bravery is remembered and his sacrifice. But try and find any solid academic Al-Abbas. There's nothing at all. There's some books which I've read, written mostly in Arabic, but they're just kind of praising him and saying what a wonderful man he was and how brave he was, which is fine. But I want to know more about Al-Abbas. I want to know about his beginning, know about his childhood and how he grew up with his two brothers, and firstly with his father, then his two brothers. He played a major role at Karbala. In fact, he and Hussein for me are inseparable. Can't separate the two. They're like joined at the hip, the two of them, at Karbala. And yet somehow he is overshadowed by Al-Hussein. I think deliberately. I think Al-Abbas deliberately stepped back into the Hussein was the man of the hour. But nonetheless, he has suffered in history because very few people know anything about him. So there are these academic problems, certainly.
We are moving towards the culmination and conclusion of this beautiful episode, and I have two questions that I would want to ask. First up, when we talk about Ali ibn Abi Talib, Lady Fatima, Al-Hasan al-Hussein, at times we exaggerate their traits to an extent where their humanness gets overshadowed. And then, for common individuals like us, a lot of people would raise such questions. These people, they were men from a different planet, they were humans from a different planet. How on earth we can follow them? It's so very difficult for us. So how important it is for us as human beings to understand these personalities through a human lens, that at the end of the day, they had human traits, they were humans, and then they were setting these lofty standards. So how would you see that?
Look, religious traditions do this with their holy people. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, we all make our holy people unreachable. We claim that they're models, but nobody could possibly reach their standards because we almost divinize them. I'm not saying we divinize them, I'm saying we almost do in the sort of language we use about them, and especially in the sort of hagiography, the books that we write about them with all kinds of miracles and supernatural events and things that don't happen in my life or in your life. Now, the key for me is that what makes is that they lived the virtues that we all meant to live, but they just lived them heroically. We're all meant to live justly and wisely, compassionately. We're all meant to live with care for our neighbor and any other virtue you want, modesty, humility. There are things we're meant to live. You know, famously, Aristotle said you live the virtues by practicing them, and as you practice, stronger and stronger. So the point about the members of the Ahl Bayt, like any other holy men and women, is that they live these virtues to the maximum. And there's no reason why any human being can't do that. That's what we're called to do. So it's say, well, you know, God worked in Al-Hussein in a way he'd never work in anyone else. No, God, every human being. We must believe that. We must believe that God raises up men, all of us, and invites us to obey his revelation and to live by the virtues that revelation down. And all of us are called to do that according to our own capacity. So it would be pointless to hold up any of these people as models if they're actually not models, if they can never be imitated. I think they can be imitated, and they're meant to be imitated. And that's why we need works that are more academic and less hagiography, because hagiography, while it's an important thing, it explores and exposes and exaggerates sometimes the super side of the person, forgetting sometimes, as you said, their humanity, that Lady Zainab, these were human beings. To say just like us. Obviously, Al-Hussein is different in the sense that he shares in the imama, and that does make him different. Of course, I understand that. But Lady Zainab was a human being just like us, and yet she lived heroically the virtues, not without struggles. Human. She was a human being who wept and who feared and who struggled, but she held on in faith, and that's what makes her so crucial for me.
Thanks for putting this out so brilliantly. At the end of the day, they are heroes with human traits, and that can be emulated or imitated in a way. One last question, Father. It had been a total pleasure, and I wish I had more time. We had more time, and we could, listen to you. The way you speak, it's brilliant. You said in one of your talks that you still get very nervous when it comes to talking about Christianity, when it comes to talking about Islam, when it comes to talking about these persons that you have been reading for decades and you're writing books on them. So where are we headed in this day and age when social media is there, and our youth, they get their information through social media. They have smaller chunks of information, and they seek their information from scholars, inverted commas, who are really loudmouths, so to speak, and they are mainstreaming narratives of hate instead of these narratives of love, compassion, of that harmonious coexistence. So scholars like you tend to get nervous, but the Google scholars of our times, they are very loud, very convincing, very confident. So the youth will be in a lot of trouble because they are listening to those men, and they're not listening to you and guys like you. So what's the way forward? It's a slightly bleak picture, so to speak, sir.
Well, I get nervous for a number of reasons. First of all, a little bit like the famous story of Moses in front of the burning bush, taking off his shoes, because I realize that with members of the Ahl Bayt, I'm walking on holy ground. I understand that. And I tread very carefully when it comes to the things of God, because I don't want my foolishness to interfere with divine wisdom when it's at work. So I tread carefully. But I am also conscious of Christians who really don't like my work, because they would say, well, your job is to convert Muslims, It's not to praise them. You should convert them to Christianity in the same way that there's some Muslims who say, well, you should convert to Islam. And well, conversion belongs to God. God converts people. We don't do that. It's his work. And I understand that a great deal of this hostility does come from religion on social media. Now, religion, like politics, is not a thing or a good thing. It's a neutral thing. It's people and the way they live religion or politics that makes it bad or good. People talk about religion today as causing so much trouble. No, religion doesn't cause any problems. People cause problems because they all set themselves up as private interpreters of what should be or what shouldn't be in all the major religions. And so, as you say, you have the famous scholars of Google, or not Google, the famous scholars of social media who are experts in their field because they've read. It would be like somebody, people read the Holy Quran or the Holy Bible and then they're suddenly religious experts. It would be like somebody reading a medical textbook and then saying, okay, I'll do some surgery now. It's just nonsensical. The word of God, however we understand it from the Muslim or the Christian or the Jewish tradition, is an extremely complex and sacred thing. And again, you want to take your shoes off and tiptoe around it a little. The odds. So many people who are theologians in every respect, and their theology is often full of hatred. And yet there's no hate in God. In the Christian tradition, as in the Islamic, God is love, not hatred. Because he's perfect. And hatred is an absence. It's a lack of something. So these theologians, or Jewish or Christian, shouting the odds, condemning others, sending people to hell, they're not doing us any favors. But I'm afraid, this is the price we pay for social media. A useful tool, but it's also a very dangerous thing, and it has endless depth, depravity. So we just have to keep working and giving our own example. And I don't ever use social media now because it's pointless, really. I just keep researching and writing and hoping that people read something I've read in the same way that I read things that other people have read, and it inspires me. And that's all we can. Light burning in our own room, even if we can't light the candles in other people's rooms necessarily.
Beautiful, beautiful. And as you were saying that, it has become pointless to be on social media. It is also poisonous to be on social media at times. There is so much venom that is coming out through social media.
Yeah.
One very last question, and I think I'm afraid that if I don't ask this question, I won't be able to sum this conversation up. Both in Christian tradition and in Islamic tradition, Christ is to come back in the eschatological movement of things, so to speak. And in Islamic tradition, there is Al-Mahdi and Jesus Christ who are going to be together. So Al-Mahdi and Jesus Christ, getting together, that means in a way that, and there will be men of faith will be together in one sense, outside a particular brand.
So firstly, Christian and Islamic eschatology is very similar. The end is going to be heralded by a number of events, a number of signs, some of them quite terrible, even the rise of a number of personalities. They're given different names in Islam. Christianity, so the Antichrist or Dajjal. So these figures arise, and it's all part of the eschatological journey and sign of the end. In the Christian tradition, of course, who Christianity claims Jesus is, he comes on the clouds of heaven, accompanied by the angels, bringing with him judgment, so that who have lived good lives inherit the kingdom, and those who have not are banished forever. In the Islamic tradition, he comes together with Al-Mahdi, who is also the bringer of final justice. That is, justice that is missing now but will be restored. And he stands side by side with the figure of Isa. So it is a different theology. There's no doubt about that. But nonetheless, it's a fascinating theology in that in a sense, Jesus provides a link between the eschatological faiths. It is about judgment. It is about reward and punishment, termination of things as we know it. So you do certainly have similarities, but there are theological differences. But that's fine. I like to look for the links rather than the differences. I know that there are differences, anyone can explain the differences. Fewer people are able to explain, and that's much more interesting for me.
Thanks a lot. Beautifully put once again. There are theological differences nonetheless, but one needs to synthesize also, integrate also for the good of humanity at the end of the day. Father, it had been a pleasure listening to you. Very rewarding experience for me personally, and we hope to have you again. We would love to have conversations along these themes, along intrafaith and interfaith dialogue. And I wish we had more scholars like you, more men of faith like you, who could do this bridge building instead of hate mongering. Thanks a lot once again, ladies and gentlemen. This was our special episode of Insaan Kal. We spoke about Ahlul Bayt, and we spoke to a man who writes books on Ahlul Bayt while he is Christian, while he is in West, and he's trying to forge this beautiful bond between Christianity and Islam. We hope and pray that we get more scholars like these who are talking about love, who are talking about compassion, and who are talking about harmonious coexistence. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Fahad Ali Kazmi, signing off. Keep watching Alief Television.